Welcome. You've got
Cat.
Hi, it's me again. I'm going to ask a favor of you in a minute, but I figured I better explain why before I do the actual asking. In a nutshell, Roxy's up to her old tricks again. As you know, we've been developing a technology for tracking paranormal activity. Let's just say that the latest stuff goes beyond tracking. Way beyond. She's up at that old house she bought, which, as you may have heard, is reputed to be extremely active. I made her promise she wouldn't do anything hasty without one of us around, but you know Roxy. Thanks in advance. And one final favor, be really cautious here. It's easy to catch Roxy's enthusiasm. Don't let her talk you into doing anything stupid. Regards, Joe.
In the late 70s and early 80s, a genre of computer game was steadily gaining popularity that would have rippling impacts on the video game industry for decades to come. Adventure games, sprawling, immersive experiences with an emphasis on story and puzzles over other gameplay mechanics, were finding fans in every corner, from children who had never played a game before to veteran tabletop RPG gamers. Starting with the text-based adventure games like Colossal Cave Adventure and Zork, technology eventually progressed enough for the very first graphical adventure game to release, Mystery House. Mystery House is practically archaic by modern standards. Though it was the first PC adventure game to really feature graphics, they're very simple, often just a few lines that are rendered on screen in real time rather than an image saved in memory. The game also still relies on a text-based parser system, which means that the player has to input their actions into a text box. Mystery House's parser is still very basic, and players may need to try multiple different commands to get the game to understand what they're saying. However, despite all this, the game was still a revelation. The first game by Sierra Online, which would later be known for their King's Quest and Space Quest series, Mystery House follows a group of teens who sneak into a spooky house to find some treasure, only to find that they are being murdered by one of their own. Mystery House isn't the only time that a horror game has broken new ground. I think the very nature of the genre makes it a good proving grounds for trying out new types of gameplay. Scary and twisted stories are often engaging entirely on their own, and so designers may feel more confident that whatever new feature they're trying out won't drive the player away, as the story is what's keeping them hooked. They may be more able to take risks, and as such, accidentally or in some cases even deliberately invent new genres. As I talked about in my Rocket video, the horror game Otogiriso was the very first visual novel, using tense horror storytelling to keep players engaged with what was otherwise just a book with images, sound, and a few branching choices. Otogiriso itself was inspired by Sweet Home, which is often credited as being the granddaddy of the survival horror genre. However, Sweet Home didn't just inspire horror games, it was also an early adopter of a number of mechanics and systems that would become staples in multiple genres, such as inventory management and the use of diaries and in-game notes to flesh out the world and narrative. Which brings me what I'm here to talk about today, a spooky game for the spooky season, Amber: Journeys Beyond. Amber: Journeys Beyond is a first-person point-and-click adventure game released in 1996 for Mac and PC. It was the first and only game created by Hue Entertainment, a husband and wife duo in the vein of Ken and Roberta Williams, who initially self-published the game and sold it online before finding distribution in stores. Like Mystery House, Amber takes place in a spooky house from which the player cannot escape, in this case because some paranormal event caused them to drive their car into a lake and is blocking communication with the outside world, leaving them stranded. The player is tasked with rescuing Roxy, the creator of some pretty intense ghost detecting equipment, and in the process discovers more about the spirits that haunt her rural North Carolina home. To add to the feeling of total isolation in the game, the player really only ever interacts with the living person one time, at the very end, when Roxy's consciousness is returned to her body and the final cutscene plays. Oh, and I guess once when Roxy somehow uses the phone while she's astral in a pretty effectively chilling scene. Is this Roxy?
Hello? Hello? It's me, Roxy. I can't hear you.
Throughout the rest of this game, the player is totally alone, left to explore a strange new location entirely on their own, with only snippets of diaries, video logs, and other books to guide them. Any other plot can only be gleaned through hints in Ghost's inner monologues or environmental storytelling. As previously mentioned, Sweet Home popularized the use of diary entries, notes, letters, and other in-game tidbits to flesh out its story. This would go on to be a fairly popular way to deliver background or exposition to a player. Games like BioShock, the Fallout series, and Borderlands would all use these methods to pretty great effect in the 2000s and 2010s. However, prior to all of this, there was one other game that used diaries and environmental storytelling to convey its narrative, and it would be impossible to ignore the influence this game had on Amber and the rest of the adventure gaming world. Myst. Myst was released in 1993, and it's... Okay, look, I'm not about to sit here and go over the history of Myst. There are some great videos out there covering this topic, one of which I'll link below. I could talk for literally an hour just about the first game. It's hard to overstate what a big deal this game was, but for brevity, I'm just gonna say that Myst was a point-and-click puzzle-solving adventure that took place over a series of ages, or worlds that can be accessed through books. It's known for its mind-bending, difficult puzzles, and, personally, for introducing me to the concept of a walkthrough. Thank you, Myst. It was freaking amazing. Go play it if you haven't. It's on like every platform. Amber echoes Myst's in a lot of ways. The point-and-click interface, the 3D environments and puzzle solving, and the total isolation are the most obvious. But, like Amber, Myst also told its stories through diaries and books. The majority of information about Myst's extensive world and its history is delivered through books that can be perused at the player's leisure. This also means that one could play through much of Myst without really encountering much of that backstory at all, and while that could be likely in a different game, Myst's gameplay actively encourages and at times requires thorough exploration and curiosity in order to complete it. This makes the books both utilitarian and optional at once, and players can read them for entertainment while still hoping to be rewarded with a hint about that puzzle that they've been stuck on for the last 3 hours. Myst is also a very isolated experience, but the vibe is much more chill than it is spooky. The setting and atmosphere play a big role here, but so too does the nature of the player's isolation. In Myst, there are still some character interactions. The player does encounter the brothers, trapped in their respective books, which are played through FMV cutscenes. FMV, as I mentioned briefly in my pets video, stands for full motion video and refers simply to pre-rendered video which is played within a game. This is FMV, and so is this, and also this. Nowadays, FMV is mostly associated with cinematic-style games with branching choices, think Dragon's Lair, and games with cutscenes that use live-action actors and scripts. In Myst, the FMV clips were small, cramped into a little book to hide the small resolution and make it easier to run on computers at the time. Amber uses a similar technique with its FMVs. Most of them are displayed on a peek device, a spirit detecting machine that shows a video of ghostly activity happening within various rooms in the house. These pop up at random while the player is exploring. These segments are some of my favorites. As the player will learn as they play through, different ghosts kind of have different personalities, so some activity might be more whimsical or frightening than others. There is also an FMV that plays on the camcorder, which, other than the introductory email at the beginning of the game, serves as the main exposition for the story. Before the video diary, the player knows a few things. Per the email, that Roxy has purchased a reputedly haunted house to do experiments in. After exploring the house and the grounds, they learn that Roxy is either missing or possibly dead in the garage, and perhaps they have learned by now a little bit about the peek and bar devices, which, according to Roxy, is redundant. You're not supposed to say bar device, but just saying the bar. It sounds so weird, so I'm gonna say device. Sorry, Roxy. These devices were scattered around the house and are not what we would call very intuitive to run. Luckily, Roxy has a proofed up version of the instruction manual for these devices in her office, so you can add reading an incomplete owner's manual to the list of fun things you get to experience in this game. Once you watch the video diary, though, things become clearer. Throughout the game at this point, there have been references to a mysterious Amber unit that Roxy seems to be troubleshooting. It isn't until Roxy's video diary that we get an idea of what this Amber thing might be.
Out for now.
Paranormal vlogs.
Day 15. I've decided to name the new device Amber. That's an acronym for Astral Mobility by Electromagnetic Resonance.
Girl, In these videos, Roxy, rocking a tone-perfect 90s smart lady vibe that is somewhere between Samantha Carter and Dana Scully, explains to the camera that she's struggling to get the unit running properly. She has sufficiently disturbed the ghosts. One of them has locked her out of an upstairs bedroom after she replaced all of the furniture with 1940s antiques, confirming her suspicion that this is a spirit from that era. So the ghosts having a strong enough frequency isn't a problem, but her old house just doesn't meet her power requirements, and so her breaker goes off before she can quote-unquote reach astral. At this point, it's up to the player to put a few things together. The Amber unit is a headset that puts its user into either a lucid dreaming or astral projection state in order to either communicate with or inhabit a spirit. Roxy is testing this equipment in her garage, excited by the high levels of ghost activity she has elicited at her house, but somehow something goes wrong. Either due to faulty equipment, the power going out, or some combination of the two, she has become trapped in the astral plane, her consciousness split among the ghosts that reside on the property. We know this because during the aforementioned phone call in which we get to speak with her, she seems to lose touch with herself for a moment and begins referencing events and characters from the ghost's former lives.
I must be drifting in and out of consciousness. I keep switching. Ted? Is it you? Who is this? Who is this?
This begins the bulk of the game, where the player must rescue the fragmented Roxy by using their own Amber device, discovering the location of each of the ghosts, and essentially solve their story, resolving their unfinished business and forcing them to confront their deaths. It's kind of amazing. The ghosts. So here's where I'm going to spoil the game a little bit. It's a 25-year-old game that is no longer in production, so I don't feel too bad about it. But if spooky adventure games with a pseudoscientific ghost machine sound like your jam, I actually highly recommend that you go play that first. There are versions out there that can run on modern Windows machines without any kind of emulation necessary, so there's very little excuse not to try it for yourself. In prepping for this video, I replayed it in about 4 hours, so it shouldn't eat up too much of your time if you want to use a walkthrough. Just a note though, this game does have 2 very blunt depictions of suicide that occur pretty much without warning, so be prepared for that if that is a concern for you. So, as the player explores, different areas of the grounds become clear hotspots for spirits, such as the upstairs near the 40s style bedroom, which fills with blood at one point, or the back door in the kitchen, which is twice shown to be the subject of violent rattling, knocking, and yelling. When the player finally hits the correct hotspot with the Amber unit on, they can enter the astral plane and go into the ghost levels. There are 3 ghosts. They can be played in any order, and they each have their own unique story, puzzles, and atmosphere. For the purposes of these levels, the player basically is the ghost. The player can hear the ghost's thoughts, giving them some insight into their confusion and hints about what has to be done.
I think I should be cold, but I'm actually rather comfortable.
I'm going to go through them in my preferred play order, which is just the one that I happened to land on when I played as a kid. The first spirit, the lake ghost, is maybe the weirdest. The player is inhabiting the spirit of a child who seems to have died in or near a frozen lake. It's actually never made explicit with any of these ghosts exactly what happened, although it's not hard to piece together if you're paying attention to the environment and ghost activity at the house. For example, in this scene, we can see a pair of tracks leading down the hill into the lake. This, plus the snow and the Christmas music, seem to indicate a sledding accident. The goal of this level is to get all of the kids' toys together so that he doesn't have to enter the castle, presumably moving him onto the beyond of the title, all by himself. Throughout the level, players have to put up with this little dude being pretty obnoxious the whole time.
Hey, stupid! Over here! Pull my finger! Don't do it.
Though for a spooky game, it also kind of works because this guy's full on creepy to me. Players navigate a car around this underwater roller coaster and solve a few simple puzzles to get Teddy safely returned to the castle. Everyone seems pretty happy to move on. The second ghost is the 40s housewife, Maggie. This one uses a really unique mechanic that I've been obsessed with ever since I first played it. The player can't get around the house in a normal way by using doors. If you try, it just creates a mess of static and a clock ticking sound, indicating that time is passing. Instead, the player must navigate to different rooms by dialing into different radio stations. Each station represents a different room of the house. Accessing different stations might require fiddling with an antenna or waiting until the station becomes available at a certain time. It's really wonderful. The radio's playing this whole time, and it plays things like period-style music pieces or war propaganda and ads for fake products from the 40s.
Southeastern Electric. When you hear the air raid alarm, light bulbs should be removed from all unoccupied rooms, porches, and yard lights so that they can't be turned on by mistake.
I'm obsessed with everything about this. The whole level is in black and white, and the sound design is perfect. It is, however, possibly the most frustrating of all the levels, as it falls into the adventure game trope of forcing the player to interact with literally everything in order to move on. At a particular moment in the puzzle, the player must be prompted by the ghost's monologue to listen to a new radio station's debut at 7 o'clock. Until you get this prompt, you cannot move on, and as far as I can tell, the only way to do it is to explore and click everything that can be clicked. I swear, I got stuck at this point for like 30 minutes on my replay recently because I missed a single interactable item. A fucking picture! A single picture! Fuck off! I kind of understand the trade-off of freedom for narrative storytelling though, because the way the story is told here is pretty masterful. The ghost is suffering from amnesia, and as you explore the house, she remembers more and more. For example, that she has a husband that is out at war, and when she goes into the kitchen, she remembers that she was making a cake for some reason. And then later in a different room, she finds his letter and remembers that the cake was a welcome home gift because he's coming home to be on leave. And then in the final room, she remembers that before he could make it back, he was killed in action. Obviously, while playing, the player has a lot more information than the ghost does up front. We know that she's dead, and because we see her body at the start of this section of the game, we even know that she killed herself. So our job is less to solve the mystery and more to guide her through this slow, painful realization herself. I mean, it's rough. It's kind of dark. I love it. And she does seem to see Ted at the end of her tunnel. So, the final ghost is the most messed up. This is Bryce, and he's the one who's been brandishing knives and rattling doors. Once you hop in, you'll see that Bryce's vision is pretty warped, and after a bit of exploring, we find out why. Bryce is maybe not in his right mind. The story takes place in the 60s or 70s, and Bryce is really into UFOs. He also has a contentious relationship with the weeds and bees in the garden where he works. The bees have, I believe, convinced him that the UFOs are coming and insult him and call him a weirdo for his obsession over a particular girl.
No Martians right dead. Or white talk. And for you, girl, adopting the crazy.
At least, I think that's what they're saying. The audio is pretty messy to begin with, being super compressed from 1996, but the buzzing on top of it makes it almost impossible to understand. But the player gets the gist just from the fact that the bees are talking to him and Bryce is screaming at them that they're liars.
You bees are all a bunch of liars!
The guy is not well. In this level, you explore the garden and you uncover some pretty hard facts about this guy. In one puzzle, you discover that he has a series of mirrors leading from the gardening shed to the bedroom window of the daughter of the man who owns the house. Perhaps more disturbingly, she seems to be aware of these mirrors and has put up signs demanding he stop spying on her. And most disturbingly, there's this. Or the back of a thing, I mean. Oh, God! As you keep playing, the player discovers Bryce's hidden room under the gazebo where he keeps a shrine to the daughter, including a letter she wrote him begging him to leave her alone. He doesn't seem to register the contents of the letter and just focuses on her nice handwriting and how much he loves that she wrote this to him. Looking into the kitchen reveals that Bryce seems to have killed the father, and one of the final puzzles finds the object of his affections dead in a closet. Apparently, Bryce accidentally killed her while trying to find a way to bring her with him, believing that the UFOs were finally coming for him. In the end, Bryce's beyond sends him down into a fiery pit. I have mixed feelings about this because while the guy was a stalker creep, he also obviously suffered from some very severe mental health issues. I don't love that. The mentally ill, people with schizophrenia, for example, are often used as cheap scares in horror media as they are frequently misunderstood by the broader public. Portraying people with delusions as dangerous is inaccurate and problematic, as they are actually more likely to be the victims of abuse than the perpetrators of it. However, if we engage with the fiction on its own terms, murdering a teen girl that you had an obsession with also objectively sucks. Either way, it's easily the most disturbing of the stories to me, so I guess as horror, it does its job. Journeys Beyond. The end of this game comes on fast, and I'm not going to talk about it too much, mostly because I think it's the weakest part of the game. There's a bit where it's implied an angel or some higher power saves your life and gives you the password to Roxy's computer in a very literal Deus Ex Machina moment, which I feel like undermines a lot of the cool shit in the story. But in the end, you've collected all of the fragments, you reintegrate Roxy, and she emerges from a giant explosion, finally asking you in the final line,
Where'd you park your car?
"It's in the lake!" And a lovely little bookend to the opening scene where you crashed it into the lake. I really love this game. One of my favorite parts is actually the pseudoscience. I like the way it tries to explain ghost phenomena by leaning into both scientific and supernatural explanations. For example, the aforementioned bar device, which reads ghostly residue left on doorknobs. This is based on an actual theory of hauntings referred to as the stone tape theory, where high energy level events, such as highly emotional or traumatic moments, can be recorded by inanimate objects as the energy is transferred to them. This theory is highly speculative and not based on much actual scientific data, if any at all, but the way that Amber Journeys Beyond handles it, by creating a device that can read this residue and play it back. Oh, okay, this might be scary.
Open the door! They're
Is a way to meld scientific-seeming devices with paranormal activity in a way that's just really satisfying. Honestly, the whole thing is just dripping in that 90s style new age stuff that I love. Roxy keeps a lucid dreaming journal and references astral projection on top of being super into ghosts, so she's basically like my 90s dream babe.
I'll solve some of my problems.
Isn't she cute? I had a crush.
Very easy.
Probably the best thing about this game, though, is the location. Like something like the very first Resident Evil, the house and grounds are just as much of a character as anything else. Playing through, you become intimately acquainted with it. The small setting and scale give the whole thing an almost cozy feeling. When I brought this game up with my mom recently, she immediately knew what I was talking about. Oh, that scary game that took place in that house? I owe this game a huge debt, as it was the first relatively spooky game that I ever got through, and I gotta say, it scared the crap out of me. The first time I ever played it, during the peek video in which a knife is picked up from the kitchen, I was in the room directly on the other side of that door, and I was shitting myself. Thinking that at any moment that knife was gonna come through that door and I was gonna have to start running. Oh, did you love that? Oh, did you see it? It's a spooky shadow.
Your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again, or call your operator to help. 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 Help.
To this day, I love stories that try to give a rational explanation for ghostly phenomena, and I dislike ones that stray too far from the grounded, almost realistic haunting style of this game. It's the perfect game to play at this time of year if you want to spend an afternoon exploring a haunted house. Happy Halloween! My patrons make all videos possible, especially ones like these, which might not actually have an audience anywhere. It's just nice that I get to talk about whatever I'm interested in, and I have them to thank for that. I'd especially like to thank Cassandra Barker, Cecil, Isabella Petroni, Mary Danielson, and Smith Incy, as well as everyone that you see on screen right now. If you want to become a patron, you can find the link in the description where you'll get access to bonus content and regular videos earlier than the rest of the world. Even if you can't contribute on Patreon, a like, a share, or a subscribe goes a long way towards really helping out my channel. Since I'm so small, every bit of engagement helps. And if you liked this one, you might like my videos about Pets or Purple Moon, which are two other weird niche games from my childhood. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, I hope you have a great day.